Welcome to Justice Trek. My name is Ted Kilvington, and this is an audio and video log that journeys through comic book history as I discuss individual comic book stories of Star Trek, the Justice Society, and the world's greatest superheroes, the Justice League of America. Justice Trek is the only show devoted to the entirety of these great comic book series, from the 1940 debut of the JSA, the launch of the JLA and Star Trek comic books in the 1960s, and right up to comics hot off today's shelves. This show will impact you in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey folks, this is Ted Kilvington. Welcome to Justice Trek. Thank you for being here for episode 14, where I will be covering Marvel Comics Star Trek number 5 from 1980. The way I'm doing the show is every Tuesday is a Trek Tuesday, and I'm alternating between 1980s Trek and modern Trek. So, and I'm also alternating between story arcs, not individual comic issues. This particular story is at the second of two parts. First part I covered last week, Marvel Comics Star Trek number 4 from 1980. And then next week we'll be back to covering IDW Star Trek. Also, besides episode 12 covering the first part of the story, we have other fine episodes for you, such as episode 13, where I covered 1978's Justice League of America number 160, which was the second of a two-part JLA-JSA team-up with special guest Ross Aitken from the Stop, Let's Team Up podcast. Okay, hope you like the show. Please click like, please click subscribe. Let's get on with the synopsis. That's my kitten, folks. Sometimes she gets jealous of you because she would prefer I pay attention to her and not you. However, she would prefer I pay attention to her 24/7, which ain't gonna happen. So she's just gonna have to learn with the fact that she's not the only entity in my life. She knows it. We have other cats. I have a wife. I have a day job. But she knows it. She just won't accept it. Yes, I'm talking about you. Okay, the first time I read this copy was about 3-4 years ago when I bought it off eBay and read it at the time, and now I'm back to reading it and talking about it with you. My reference copy for this story is the comic that I bought off eBay a few years ago. I also have a copy of the story in the Eagle Moss Star Trek graphic novel collection where they covered the first 7 issues of Marvel Star Trek. Bit of background information. This story takes place immediately after the film Star Trek The Motion Picture. A brief roll call in order of appearance: Captain James T. Kirk, Commander Spock, Commander Dr. Leonard McCoy, Raytag Megora, an insane non-humanoid Normedia prisoner from the Orlan Quadrant. We also have Lieutenant Commander Hikaru Sulu, Lieutenant Pavel Chekhov, Commander Montgomery Scott, Lieutenant Dr. Christine Chappell, and Lieutenant Commander Nyata Uhura. Star Trek number 5 was published May 6, 1980 by Marvel with a 40-cent cover price and an August cover date. The Haunting of the Enterprise was a 17-page story by Mike W. Barr, writer, Dave Cockrum, pencil artist, Klaus Janson, ink artist, John Costanzo, letterer, Carl Gafford, colorist, and Dennis O'Neill, editor. The synopsis below is taken from memory-beta.fandom.com. Captain's log, stardate 7417.4. The planet Thalos, lying just outside Klingon space, had sent word that it wished to join the Federation. Our mission was twofold: to return an escaped prisoner, the mad, blind Raytag Megora, to Thalos, and to escort the Federation ambassador Rikig there as well. To our horror, the ambassador was killed by a being who appeared to be Dracula, the vampire of ancient Earth legends, while other strange and terrifying monsters from Earth's past also haunted the Enterprise. And now we face the equally deadly, if more familiar, Klingons. Mere hours earlier, as we approached Thalos, we had been diverted from course to deliver Raytag to a waiting prison satellite. Or so we thought. In fact, we had fallen into a Klingon trap, and our destination was an old-fashioned haunted house, floating in space. In the haunted house, the Klingon leader shoots and kills an Andorian ensign in the landing party. Kirk fires back with his phaser on stun. During the ensuing fight, the young woman tells McCoy she cannot remember why she was in the house. Kirk asks Scotty to beam them back, but the Klingons have an energy field around the house, jamming the transporter. When the Klingons capture Spock, smash his communicator, and drop the energy field to beam so that they may beam back to their ship, Scotty beams the others back to the Enterprise. On the Klingon ship, the commander tells Spock his mission was to acquire the Enterprise so the Klingons could examine its new warp engines, but that they now have a use for the crew. On the lower deck of the Klingon ship, a man in a strange spacesuit is roused from his drugged sleep by agony in his mind and knows he must again summon the nightmares. Captain's log, stardate 7417.6. So far, the Klingon vessel has taken no action. We have not located Mr. Spock within their ship, nor have we learned anything new from the mysterious young woman, or from our prisoner. In the Enterprise brig, Raytag says the young woman has the answers to the situation, but does not know it. The Klingons fire on the Enterprise, disabling warp drive. In sickbay, McCoy discovers startling discrepancies in the tricorder readings on the young woman. Monsters again appear on the Enterprise, first in life support engineering, then everywhere. Captain's log, stardate 7417.7. Again, monsters of every description have invaded the Enterprise. Few of my crew have yet fallen to them, but they appear to be increasing not only in number, but in size and ferocity. It is only a matter of time before they overrun the ship. Our one hope is to discover how the Klingons are materializing the monsters here. But we've been so busy fighting them, we haven't had time for detective work. McCoy arrives on the bridge and tells Kirk that the young woman is not human. On the Klingon ship, the commander shows Spock their thought enhancer. When a damaged starship drifted into Klingon space, the Klingons discarded everyone aboard, except for a horror film archivist, the human in the strange spacesuit. By allowing him to create a construct of his dead wife, they gained control of his mind and are using him to materialize monsters from his knowledge of films. The haunted house is a restructured space station. The projection process requires a receptor aboard the Enterprise. Raytag, who has been offered freedom by the Klingons, he has a receiver implanted in his skull. The commander leaves Spock guarded in the room with the human. Spock tells the guard that the young man appears ill and asks if he can examine him. Captain's log, stardate 7417.8. None of our measures seem to permanently repel the creatures. Our phasers disintegrate them, but they reappear as fast as we cut them down. All our security forces are occupied elsewhere. Should the monsters invade the bridge, we will have to fight them ourselves. The monsters attack the bridge. The young woman still says she knows nothing. On the Klingon ship, Spock mind melds with the young man. A fuzzy image of Spock appears on the Enterprise bridge and tells Kirk to destroy the girl. McCoy realizes Spock uses the word destroy because the girl was never alive. To Kirk's horror, McCoy fires his phaser and dematerializes her. On the Klingon ship, the young man awakens with an anguished scream. The monsters disappear from the Enterprise and appear instead on the Klingon ship. Raytag has been killed by an overload of psionic pain, which burned out his receiver and reflected the signals back to the Klingon ship. Spock nerve pinches his guard and frees the dazed young man, whose wife had been killed by the Klingons. Recovering the thought enhancer, Spock and the young man head for the Klingon transporter room. The ship's shields are brought down by a wild shot as the Klingons fight the monsters. Spock then beams himself and the young man to the Enterprise bridge. Captain's log, stardate 7417.9. The young film archivist, the Klingon thought enhancer, and Raytag's body have all been delivered to Star Base 16. The Klingon effort to trap the Enterprise failed, and Mr. Spock and Dr. McCoy are suggested for commendations. Spock explains that the young woman was the image of the archivist's dead wife, and that destroying her caused the man such pain that it awakened him and overloaded the receptor. McCoy needles Spock about the fact that the Vulcan's life was saved by the young man's human emotions. The end. Okay, I'm going to do the credits now. I like to do the credits in the middle of the show. When we come back, I'm going to do my page-by-page analysis of Marvel Comics Star Trek number 5 from 1980. Please stick around. It'll be worth your time. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to send them to me on Twitter under the handle @JusticeTrek or via email at thejusticetrek@gmail.com. Be sure to include the word "the" at the beginning of the email address. For research purposes, I rely heavily on dc.fandom.com, memory-alpha.fandom.com, comicvine.gamespot.com, the Grand Comics Database at comics.org, and Mike Boyle's website, Mike's Amazing World of DC Comics at dcindexes.com. The opinions expressed are solely those of the host and any participants. This podcast is not a commercial enterprise and does not make any money. All copyrights are held by their respective owners. The opening sequence was animated by Craig Smith of Phoenix Studios. The opening music is Dragon Slayer by the Makai Symphony. All music used is either public domain and/or not protected by copyright. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comments, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Hey, thanks for coming back. I appreciate that your time is limited, that you have a lot of choices, and so I'm very grateful that you choose to spend your time with me. I will make it worth your while. So, that was a great conclusion to the story, I thought. The pencil art for issue number 5 was by Frank Miller. This is the first time Frank Miller has done anything with Star Trek, and not a bad cover, but Frank Miller is not known for Star Trek, so it's a unusual treat to see him do that work here. And he's inked on the cover by Klaus Janson. You may recall from the episode 12 where I went on about the work that Klaus Janson did with Frank Miller on Daredevil, and it was a great collaboration. Great art. Klaus Janson was great on the atmosphere of Daredevil. I just don't think, in my opinion, that his talents were a good mesh for Star Trek, regardless of whether he was penciling Frank Miller or Dave Cockrum. My opinion. Let's see. Page 1. The first part of the storyline began with a splash page of the Enterprise approaching a haunted house in space, even though that scene wouldn't actually occur until 3/4 of the way into that issue's story. This splash page, however, the image of the Klingons killing the Andorian ensign, picks up directly where the previous issue ended. So the death of the ensign really scaled up the action and stakes of the story. Now, I mentioned in the last episode that They no longer have the red shirts. The in the original series, it was a kind of a trope almost that when a person was to be killed on an away mission, it was almost always some random ensign wearing a red shirt. Well, they no longer have red shirts, but apparently they still have sacrificial ensigns. And this guy didn't even have a red. Not only did he not have a red shirt, he had blue skin. It's interesting that the humans and even the half-human Spock, well, they all survived, but the Andorian, but he was killed by the Klingon, so you can't really fault the Enterprise. Maybe you can fault the writer. I don't know. I don't get into that. Let's see. Page 2. Kirk orders the landing party to use phasers set to stun, even though the Klingons already killed an Enterprise crew member. And the leader of the Klingons even says, "You set your Klingons, send your phasers to stun. Well, we're not going to hesitate to kill you. We already killed one of you. We'll kill the rest of you." Now, on the one hand, the Enterprise crew are literally in a situation that would appear to be kill or be killed. I mean, they are a paramilitary organization, and they do face hostile fire. And when you're facing hostile fire, sometimes you have to respond with lethal force. There are times, like in the original series, where they killed, whether it was Klingons or other races, species, if they were posing a threat to their lives. However, death is not Jim Kirk's first option. Jim Kirk does fight for life. You may recall that in the film Star Trek III, released a few years after this comic, on the Genesis planet that's exploding, and after everyone else is either dead or teleported off the planet, and it's just Kirk, Spock, and the Klingon commander. The Klingon commander, as the planet is tearing itself apart, he falls into a fissure that it opens up on the planet, and he's hanging on the ledge. And Kirk offers him a hand so that he won't die. This is somebody responsible for the death of Kirk's own son, and Kirk is still offering him a hand. It was only when the Klingon tried to pull Kirk down with him, because the Klingon made it clear that he would rather die than accept help from Kirk. In fact, when Kirk was helping him, he tried to kill really both of them. He was literally trying to kill both of them. So that's when Kirk finally lost his temper and said, "I have had enough of you." And he basically kicks the Klingon in the face until he lets go of Kirk's leg and lets go of the edge of the ravine, and then falls into the crevice towards his death. So Kirk fights for life. As they said in that film, you turn death into a fighting chance to live. Page 3. The image of Spock being knocked unconscious by the Klingon breaking a chair in his head was humorous. It kind of reminded me of an old-fashioned Western movie bar fight, or the bar fight between the Klingons and the Enterprise crew in the original series episode, The Trouble with Tribbles. Page 4. I said it before when I covered, sorry, I made this comment about the cover inks, but so I won't make it again. Klaus Jansson's inks, sorry, not a fan. Page 5. The image of the Enterprise, the Klingon bird of prey, and the haunted house all floating near each other almost looks like a Mexican standoff. Page 6. Captain Kirk was depicted on this page in a variety of artistic ways. In panel 1, he looks pudgy. In panel 2, he looks fine. In panel 4, he is drawn minimally with no lines for his nose or chin. It's just shadows. And in panel 6, he is well rendered, but the coloring is monotone. When you put the 4 images together, it looks like an Andy Warhol collage. I don't know how much of that was it in the script? Was it an artistic choice by Dave Cockrum? Was it part of the Klaus Jansson's inks? Was it an editorial choice? Maybe Denny O'Neil, the new editor on Star Trek, wanted to bring some creativity, and he wanted the things drawn differently. Don't know who was responsible for it, but it's definitely an unusual look for Trek. Page 7. Wow. Just look at McCoy's eyes bug out in panel 2. You know? It looks like he's on some type of mega space cocaine. Page 8. The collage of horror images affecting the Enterprise crew. It looks pretty good. You know, Dave Cockrum, you know, he's been at Marvel for several years. He knows how to draw all Marvel horror. Page 9, Spock is drawn with a weird droopy eye in panel 2. Page 10, we finally get the explanation for all of the weird stuff that's been happening in the first 3 quarters of the story arc. Page 11, this time, when the monsters appear, Kirk orders phasers to kill, which of course is ironic because they're not alive. Page 12, Kirk has realized that the girl isn't any more real than the monsters, and he has told that to Kirk, but Kirk hasn't grasped it yet. Page 13, I really like how Spock was able to mind mold with a prisoner and use that connection to get a message to the Enterprise about the key to ending the threat. I wonder, though, if the prisoner could tell somehow that Spock was basically telling the Enterprise to kill what he believed was his wife. Page 14. A great scene of the Klingons getting their just desserts with the monsters appearing on the bird of prey. Page 15. The Klingon in panel 2 looks like he has a mutton chop beard. I don't recall seeing that on any Klingons in live action. It's not a bad choice, it's just an unusual one. Page 16. They mention that the Klingon ship's shields are down, thus allowing Spock and the prisoner to teleport from the bird of prey over to the Enterprise. But nothing is ever said about the Enterprise's shields being down. In fact, earlier in the story, after that first Klingon attack disabled the Enterprise's warp core, Kirk orders the shields raised. And it's never mentioned again in the story about the Enterprise shields ever being lowered. And in Star Trek, they always say that both the transmitting the transmitting teleporter device and the receiving teleporter device have to be unshielded in order for the teleportation to be successful. Page 17. I love the irony, as McCoy points out, of Spock basically using human emotions to save himself and to end the Klingon threat. Now, this was Mike W. Barr's first published Star Trek story. He would only do a couple for Marvel, but he would do several for DC. Overall, it's a great conclusion to the story. Writer Marv Wolfman set it up in issue 4, and he set up the pins, and Mike W. Barr knocked him down. Marv Wolfman loaded the bases, and then Mike W. Barr hit it out of the park. Whatever analogy you want to use. Considering that the 2 issues had different writers and editors, I thought the story went pretty well. Now, of course, Marv Wolfman, no doubt, had left some notes or something for Barr and O'Neill. But they took those notes and they used them well. To me, it was actually a shame that Marv Wolfman would never write another Star Trek, but he did go edit DC Star Trek, so he continued to keep his feet in the Trek waters. And Mike W. Barr was off to a great start. His Star Trek comics are still fondly remembered to this day. Not just by me. I can find you at least 2 other people that like him. I don't know. I did a poll on Twitter recently asking what was your favorite iteration of Star Trek, and the early 80s Star Trek, which was first written by Mike W. Barr, was the favorite of that Twitter poll. Now Marvel Star Trek, of course, was different, as we'll see in upcoming episodes. Now, the way I do my Trek coverage on Justice Trek is first I do an episode, a story arc from the 80s, all followed on the next Tuesday by a story arc from the present. So now that we've finished this story arc, next week's episode, number 416, will be covering 2022's Star Trek Klingons. And that actually will tie into the upcoming, it's now currently ongoing, but I will cover it in upcoming episodes of the current IDW Star Trek series. I don't think a lot of fans that started with issue 1 realized that there was that setup in Star Trek Klingons, but you know it now, and then I'll explain it to you. We also, of course, will have our following Justice League episode, where I'll be covering 2022's The New Golden Age #1 from DC, featuring the Justice Society of America. The Justice Track, remember our mission statement is to cover Justice League, Star Trek, and Justice Society, and there been some good Justice Society comics published in the last year, and I'll be talking about them starting next episode. So don't worry, we will be covering 80s Trek and 80s Justice League. We'll be covering current Trek and Justice League and Justice Society, and look up 80s Justice Society when they come around. Hope you like the coverage. If you do, please click like, please click subscribe, and hey, keep on Justice Trekking.